Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 5th of June 2023. All seems to be starting to happen. I don't know. I've heard from some sources that basically the counteroffensive may well be in motion. That's not to say that you're going to see necessarily huge numbers of new Western equipment that we've heard so much about, and main battle tanks like the Leopards and the Challengers right now. I think they're still going to be shaping operations, probing operations that are trying to find little weaknesses using existing resources. And I think we've seen that. We started to see that in Bakhmut. We have seen that to some extent in other places like around Vuhledar, and today in Velika Novosilka and surrounding areas. So anyway, we'll get to that. It's just interesting when you have pro-Russian voices. Methinks the lady does protest too much. Jonathan, get this into your hard head. There is no Ukrainian offensive, and there will never be one. It is all for show to scare off Russians to miraculously withdraw by themselves. No amount of verbosity can change the stubborn facts you choose to ignore. Absolute unbridled nonsense. And another pro-Russian voice says, it seems that Ukraine has lost the capabilities to launch an all-out counteroffensive thanks to Russian cruise missiles. The only thing they have left is limited counteroffensives on multiple fronts, which mostly results in defeat, as we've seen the last 2 months. Well, we haven't seen that, but let's just remember those voices and we'll return to them in a few weeks' time, maybe a few months' time, to say, yeah, were you right? Or, were you wrong? So what's going on along the front lines? Well, indeed, there are lots of smaller counterattacks. So there is an element of that. I think probing attacks before the big push. But let's start with what's going on up in Belgorod. So just to remind you, Belgorod is this area to the north of Ukraine. We'll look at that on my map. So this is the Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna front line. And as we come up to here, we can see Shebekino up there, northeast of Kharkiv. Now, this is where there's activity with these two Russian volunteer forces, possibly even some Polish volunteers up there as well, I have heard. Well, it appears that they are still active there. The Russians don't quite know what to do about them. So much so that Prigozhin has said, well, look, the Wagner can go and work up there if you want. And then the Chechen Ramzan Kadyrov has said, well, we can pop up there because the Russian conventional forces up there are doing the square root of Nafal, it appears, apart from trying to level it with artillery and aviation. The Russians are using artillery on their own settlements, as well as Ukrainians from within Ukraine bombarding the area with their own artillery. So it's all just a bit of a huge mess up there. Apparently, they've captured 4 more villages to the west and east of Shebekino inside of Russia, as we can see here. I mean, you've got to understand that the scale of this map. It might appear that the pro-Ukrainian Russians have taken so much territory, but of course, this is just a very small stretch of the front just here, really. So nonetheless, they are still there and they are still causing problems. There's imagery of street-to-street gunfire. There's drone footage of, I think, a tank, maybe a couple of tanks being taken out, BMP, and so on. There is also imagery of a substation on fire. There's apparently not been electricity and water in the area for a week. And Poulet Volant says that, you've got these units operational there. So that's ongoing, and I think causing an issue because, as I've talked about before, it kind of distracts the Russians so that they are thinking, well, do we send forces there from elsewhere? Well, what forces do we have? Do we try and gather something from inside Russia to send there, or do we take them from the front line? And of course, this is a perfect kind of distraction prior to possibly a large counteroffensive move or a set of counteroffensive moves. Now, if we go down to the Kupiansk to Kreminna axis, we can see, well, in fact, no, let's go back to the ISW to talk about that area in Belgorod. So they say the ISW Institute for the Study of War American Military think tank says the limited raids and border shelling in Belgorod are increasingly becoming the current focal point for criticism against the Russian military leadership. The dissonant Russian responses to and reporting about the limited raid in Belgorod continue to suggest that the Russian leadership has not yet decided how to react to these limited cross-border raids, and that itself produces that criticism. A prominent mill blogger used the raid in Belgorod Oblast to criticize the MOD for not funding Belgorod territorial defense volunteer formations and for not considering the volunteers as actual combatants. Former Russian officer and ardent ultra-nationalist Evil Gherkin argued that the Kremlin cannot do anything about the situation in Belgorod Oblast without engaging in a costly diversion of resources that would likely end in an attritional operation reminiscent of Bakhmut. I mean, it's all going wrong for the Russians, really, in terms of all this infighting, so on and so forth. Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin claimed on June 4th that Ukrainian forces may have regained positions in southwest Bakhmut. We'll come to that in a second. Sorry, I thought that was still on the Belgorod stuff. So that is what's going on in Belgorod. If we come down to the Kupiansk front line, the axis from Kupiansk to Kreminna, there's quite a lot of activity up and down there. It seems to me as though, and you could actually argue this for both sides, like there's an uptick in Russian activity along this axis, but also Ukrainian activity too. Talking about repelled and unsuccessful attacks in various places. Syrsky, who's the Ukrainian force commander, reported that Russian forces are attempting to restart their offensive operations near Adiivka. Just to remind you, that's a small settlement just to the northeast of Kupiansk. Just a couple of houses, really, in this wooded area just to the east of the Oskil River. The Russians have taken this land from the Ukrainians and have advanced up to just past Liman Pershi, going southwards. They are restarting their offensive operations there. Novoselivska and Kuzumivka, that is just north of Svatova, and Makivka. Okay, so these are the hot points. Again, it's the Kuzumivka and Novoselivska area there, and then we come down to Makivka there. This is Svatova, Kreminna. So you get 3 points along this line there, and there. Okay, so what else do I have to say? Syrsky added that Russian forces are reinforcing their positions with Storm Z assault units that are staffed with convicts. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces deployed a group of 500 convicts to reinforce an unspecified element operating in the Kharkiv Oblast, and that the Ukrainian forces injured almost 100 of these convicts with artillery fire. Interesting, and I don't know if this is the one that is noted here. So this is a Facebook General Staff post from today. They said Russian occupants continue to suffer great losses in live force. In particular, it has been established that the personnel composition from the number of former convicted citizens of the Russian occupation forces operating in the temporarily occupied territory of the Kharkiv region within a week arrived in one of the units of the Russian Federation in a number of 500 people, following the task of firing impact by the defense forces of Ukraine in the enemy positions. About 100 persons from the number of new reinforcements suffered injuries of varying degrees of severity, in particular non-life related, and non-life related. Also, I mean, the translation's a bit dodgy here. Also, after this event, about 80 people voluntarily left their positions. Not quite sure what to make of that. Basically, convicts have been sent to the area, kind of unspecified areas on this Kharkiv front line. You can see that Luhansk comes down here, the border comes down there. So in the Kharkiv Oblast, that's got to be up in this area. So possibly in the Adiivka area we're talking about. They have lost, a number wounded due to Ukrainian artillery fire. Then it goes on to say in the ISW that Ukrainian and Russian forces both claim to have made limited territorial gains on the Kupiansk-Svatova line. On June 4th, Syrsky stated that Ukrainian forces successfully advanced 400 meters in an unspecified area in the Svatova direction and liberated a significant area of the Ivanivsky forest. Russian sources claimed that Russian forces crossed the Oskil River and seized Novominsk, but noted an absence of photo or video evidence for this claimed advance. So just going back to the claim from Sursky, that the Ivanivsky forest is by Bakhmut, I think he's talking about there. But the other part, an unspecified Svatova direction, 400 meters there, it's difficult to know, but it could be anywhere in this area. I know that previously the Russians have been repelled around Stelmakivka and Kuzmivka from they were attacking the Russians there and then got repelled and were pushed back into Stelmakivka area. I don't know if that's your 400 meters of gained Ukrainian ground, but it's not a huge amount of territory, is it? So anyway, activity going on up and down this axis, and then we go back to the ISW, see what's going on further to the south. Just a usual mention of Kreminna, the forest area, Belgorod and Spirna, that the Russians are continuing their offensives in that area. So if we look at that, on my map, that is Belgorod just to the south of the Kreminna forest here, and Spirna just there, where the Russians have made some advances. Now, there has been very little, explicit mapping information about what's going on in Bakhmut. The Ukrainians, when they do counteroffensives, as they've done a couple previously, have kept a really tight ship with regard to operational security. They don't let a lot of information out on what is going on, and so mappers like Deep State Map have actually relatively little change in their mapping, even though there's potentially quite a lot of change going on. There has been that report of some substantial gain in the Ivanivsky forest area. Exactly what forest area that is? Could that be this forested area just to the north of Klishchivka? Could it be this area there? Well, they already have that gained anyway. It's difficult to know exactly what is going on there, but there's quite a lot of news has come out about Bakhmut. Otherwise, let's go back to the ISW that was saying earlier. So Prigozhin claimed on June 4th that Ukrainian forces may have regained positions in southwestern Bakhmut, supporting repeated Ukrainian reports that the Ukrainian forces maintain positions on the southwest outskirts of the city. So this is the admission that actually the Ukrainians do have a foothold in the southwestern area of Bakhmut. They probably never were fully pushed out of that. There was talk about Ukrainians blowing up buildings before they left and then hitting other buildings with aviation. So they are still sort of hammering Russian positions there. What was interesting, and I talked about this in my news video this morning, is that there is some video footage now out of a lieutenant colonel of the 72nd Brigade. These were the guys that ran away from here, if you remember. It's probably up here a week or so ago, and Prigozhin was absolutely fuming that the flanks were starting to crumble, and he was able to drive that wedge between the Wagner PMC and conventional Russian forces, further into that division. It appears that Wagner have kind of captured, if you like, this lieutenant colonel, given him a bit of a roughing up. And then got him to do a confessional video where he admitted to striking Wagner, striking a Wagner vehicle, taking out a whole bunch of disarming a whole bunch of the Wagner personnel, and then striking with reporting from Ukraine was talking about how the Wagner were trying to remove themselves from an area. There were lots of mines that had been laid, and the assumption is that the mines were laid by the Russian conventional forces for the Wagner PMC, and so they were demining that area, and then they were hit by Russian conventional artillery. So there's this literally kind of civil war going on, and then they've got this confessional video from this lieutenant colonel admitting to at least some of that. It's just like absolutely incredible. So there's a massive issue. There's huge tension between the Wagner PMC and the conventional forces, and it's the conventional forces that are replacing Wagner here. And I wonder if Prigozhin, almost wants the Russian forces to fail in this area to make it look like Wagner are that much better than them. But yeah, all sorts of stuff going on there. Let's go and look at some of the other claims, and this is just coming out now. So the head of Wagner, Prigozhin, has said that Ukrainian forces have captured part of Bakhivka, north of Bakhmut, and indeed this is reported in, or it was reported in the Guardian here. It's now disappeared. Yeah, it gives just a little summary here. I did have it previously. But anyway, Russian mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin said on Monday that Ukrainian forces had retaken part of the settlement of Bakhivka, north of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine, calling it a, quote, disgrace. Okay, let's go to Bakhivka. So that is in next to this reservoir just north of Bakhmut here, and the reservoir is there. So Bakhivka is this town to the north. So that means the Ukrainians could have made some serious advances here, which then threatens this whole kind of salient to the north of Bakhmut along the E40 MZO3 highway that goes off towards Pravilia and Minkivka here. So that would be incredibly important if the Russians have been pushed back here, and you can see an advance for the Ukrainians along there. I don't know if it's to the south of the reservoir they've done that, or to the north, just under Dubovo-Vasilivka. But if you can imagine them cutting off the Ukrainians cutting off the Russian forces in that whole area, that could be something of a problem for the Russians for sure. Just to remind you what my mapping does in this area, I know someone said they couldn't work it out. Yes, I do keep explaining. These are all Russian defensive lines. This is only in the Bakhmut area where these three colors are relevant. Or a little bit in Adiivka. I'll come to that later. So the Russian lines, as according to pro-Ukrainian mapper Andrew Perpetua, pro-Ukrainian mapper, that's blue, and Deep State maps in yellow, and pro-Russian mapper Suryat maps in red. And it's just to try and get an idea of what they're all claiming. There's a general agreement as to what's going on in the north, and then it starts to be a little bit more messy down to the south and southwest of Bakhmut, but they have started to agree a lot more than they were maybe a week or two ago. There's some disagreement around Klishchivka as to who controls what. We haven't seen any mapping changes from any of the mappers, but there almost definitely is change. I mean, Syrskyi is talking about substantial gains in a forested area of the Ivanitsky forest, which one assumes, as I said, is around there. Bakhivka is just filtering through right now, yeah, so on and so forth. That is Bakhmut. We'll go back to the ISW that says in their actual Bakhmut section, Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council, Alexei Danilov has reported that the loss ratios of losses of Russian forces to Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut was 7.5 to 1. Now, is this going to be accurate? Is he telling the truth? Arguably, there will be some element of exaggeration here. However, the official line is 7.5 to 1, and that would justify the defense of Bakhmut for as long as it was taking place. Indeed, you can argue it is still going on, right? 7.5 to 1 over that time is huge. And if that is accurate, but even if that's, really inaccurate to the tune of it's only maybe 5 to 1 or 4 to 1, if you even halve that, that is still massively significant and still arguably worth the Ukrainians defending that town for the length of time they did. Anyway, that is Bakhmut. Is obviously quite dynamic at the moment. I'll see how that develops over the course of the day. As we come down past Kupiansk-Kreminna, past New York, we come on to Adiivka, and apparently there has been activity there, and there is activity there. Sometimes it's a bit sort of cryptic, just like Ukrainian army movements reported from Adiivka and Vuhledar. But there is other evidence here. So failed Russian attack in the area of Adiivka with equipment losses, and here's a video showing some of these losses. And there's a couple of these Adiivka videos going around. So the Russians still taking a little bit of a hammering in that area. That is near Troitsky as well. Let's have the Russian vehicles destroyed. Let's have a bit of geolocation for some shits and giggles. Excuse my French. Right. Let's see where that is. So that is actually further to north. So that indicates a position that was it there? yeah, I think here where the Ukrainians pushed back a week or two ago, and we didn't really see much detail coming out about that. Only some big mapping changes, and the Russians pushed back a good distance there, and that could be indicative of that. So some lost Russian equipment there possibly too. But yeah, Avdiivka is. Uh, there's some claims about the Ukrainians really pushing the Russians back in Opitny and Vodyane. Indeed, is it the ISW that states that they might even have a foothold in Vodyane, which would be quite incredible. So the ISW says Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces conducted offensive operations near Avdiivka yesterday, and Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian ground attacks near Opitny and Vodyane. Some Russian sources claimed that Ukrainian forces entered Vodyane, while some Russian mill bloggers refuted this claim. So who knows? The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces did not conduct offensive operations near Avdiivka. So all sorts of your normal kind of conflicting claims of who's doing what there. But we have seen Andrew Perpetua here. This is the only other place where I've got the three mappers. Actually, it's uh, not so much to the north, but in the southern area, I changed the blue line to be Andrew Perpetua. It's only in the southern area. Otherwise, the blue line is just a random Ukrainian line. But here, this represents what he thinks the Russian defensive line is. So it's pushed right back to the just the tip of Vodyane and Opitny. The other mappers disagreeing a little bit with that, but I think the Russians probably have been pushed back here. We know they've been pushed back by Pervomysky to the south there as well. So there is to and fro, pushing and shoving around here from both sides. So expect that. But it could also be that the Ukrainians, as they seem to have done in Bakhmut and Vuhledar, trying to push with the forces they have at their disposal rather than dipping into the counteroffensive pot and seeing if they can probe and find weaknesses. And maybe if they find the weaknesses, then they can get some more assistance and reinforcements to try and exploit a weakness found. I don't know if that's what they're doing there, but it could be the case that that is the case. Okay, moving on from Avdiivka, we come to Marinka. Marinka has been the scene of quite a lot of activity recently. I've left my mapping as it was yesterday in this area to indicate that this is where the Russians have made some advances, as according to Suryat Maps, a pro-Russian mapper. ISW says that there are Akhmat elements as well as conventional forces with artillery are conducting assault operations in Marinka, while the Ukrainian forces attempted a counterattack there. So there is limited ground attacks in that area yesterday. I don't know that there's been any change there at all yesterday. And then we pop down to, so coming out from Marinka, still will be tough fighting going on there. We come down to Vuhledar, just in the corner of the front line here. This is in the southern Donetsk, southern and western Donetsk Oblast. I mean, the oblast goes all the way to past Velika Silka. And we have seen activity in Vuhledar and a lot of activity in Velika Silka. But we'll start with Vuhledar and go on to the ISW that says Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces conducted ground attacks near Pavlivka and Mikilska. Another mill blogger characterized the Ukrainian attacks near Pavlivka and Mikilska as unsuccessful reconnaissance and force operations. I think they have made ground there. They pushed the Russians back, but that was a few days back. I don't know whether yesterday they were indeed repelled or whether they're making advances there. Just that there is activity around that area. And then we come on to Velika Silka, and this is where people are talking about the beginnings of the counteroffensive writ large. I don't know whether that is the case. I think this is more likely using existing resources, but maybe a few more of them. Let's talk about maybe 30 pieces of mechanized equipment being thrown at this, and they have made some significant gains. Now, what I've done is both part of my rejigging of maps anyway. This might not be all the counteroffensive, but this is, from what I can work out, the blue line is in this area where the Russians are now pushed to, and the red line is where the Russians were, but that might not have been 100% accurate because it might have needed a bit of rejigging anyway. So there's a bit of rejigging and then a lot of counterattack around this area. So the blue line, just for today, shows you where the Russians have been pushed back to. Okay, let's go and have a look at some of the claims as to what's going on in this area. According to a large Russian telegram, Operation Z, Ukrainian forces have breached the first lines of defense near Velika Novoselka. The villages of Neskuchnya and Novodorivka have been liberated, and Russians have fallen back to reserve positions in Storozheve. Assaults are ongoing. And so this was yesterday. So that's just to zoom in. We have Storozheve there being pushed back there, and Neskuchnya might well be now under Ukrainian control. There's a lot of activity around Rivnopil from Novopil, and Novodorivka is under Ukrainian control of the claims there. I mean, that was, I think, more of a grey zone previously to yesterday. Nonetheless, again, talking about these gains and heat on the front line in the area. Now, some video footage of a T-64BV destroying a T-80, a Russian T-80. So at least one Russian tank has been destroyed near Novodorivka, although I'm sure someone else saying actually it wasn't a tank-on-tank duel this, but I don't know. Anyway, nonetheless, the Russians have lost some equipment there, but they've also made some big claims about Ukrainian losses in the area. Just to let you know that the Ukrainian attack here has been geolocated. This is part of the Ukrainian losses of mechanized equipment, but we'll talk about that in a second. For the time being, let's see where they're talking about here. So this is Ukrainian equipment here being attacked by the Russians. So the Ukrainians, that would support the idea that they have advanced towards the south in that area. Further video footage of what is going on. There's a couple of pieces of video evidence. In fact, if we go to look at what Rob Lee is saying about the whole theatre here, the Russian MOD says that Ukraine began a large-scale offensive in the southern Donetsk direction this morning. Alexander Kolokovsky says that Ukraine attempted a breakthrough in the Velika Novoselka direction of Donetsk Oblast. He says that they achieved tactical success and took a position, but also sustained losses. He says Ukraine is reinforcing the area. Well, the Russian MOD losses, well, the claim for the Ukrainian losses that the Russian MOD have released are 250 men, 16 tanks, 3 IFVs, and 21 armored vehicles. So that's about, you can see that's about 40 vehicles and 250 men. The video evidence that is available suggests that the Ukrainians lost 1 tank and not 16, or sorry, at least 1 tank. And then I think 9 vehicles rather than another 24 vehicles. But the Russians, I guess, could be correct here. But taking into account all their other claims that they make, I would say that would be a wild over-exaggeration. But the Ukrainians have lost some equipment in doing this. As you would expect, attacking, when you've got mines to think about, when you've got artillery. And I think artillery is a bit of a problem. They have been absolutely hammering artillery, particularly in this Zaporizhia region. But the Russians have a lot of artillery, right? And so they are going to, and they've got drones in the air. So as soon as the Ukrainians attack, if you're only attacking in a few places, then you are able to concentrate artillery along those lines. So if you're going to force yourself into a small fist to attack in maybe a couple of very small places, which is kind of the received wisdom when you are negotiating trenches and minefields. You don't want to spread your forces out, so all of your forces are having to negotiate in minefields. You want to concentrate and punch in certain areas to break through the minefields and trenches, and then everyone piles through and you spread out behind the defenses. But one of the challenges, and this is just me speculating, goodness me, do I know what I'm talking about? Probably not. One of the challenges with these kind of small fists is that the defensive artillery can then concentrate their fire into just a couple of small areas, rather than if everyone was attacking on a large area, then artillery, if you've got artillery all along kind of this area, this is Russian artillery positioned. It's going to be further back than that. But they if you're attacking everywhere, then they'd have to spread out their artillery to take out Ukrainian attacks in all of these areas. But actually, the reality is that all of that artillery can now concentrate on small pockets of Ukrainian equipment, and that's a bit arbitrary where I'm drawing there. But you get the point. Is that that then makes it easier for the artillery to take out those bits of equipment. So we are seeing some footage of that, and that's really important for the Ukrainians to continue to explicitly target Russian artillery, which we know they're doing. Russian Telegram channel also saying there that the Ukrainians are attacking the Vuhledar area. That might refer to that Bakhmut activity just north of Bakhmut. So Khodorkovsky Pergov and another Russian channel say that Ukrainian forces began attacking in this area around 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock this morning with around 30 armored vehicles. It's interesting. They say that these are Russian sources saying they attacked with 30 armored vehicles, and then the Russian MOD saying that they destroyed 40 armored vehicles. So it's like they're attacking us with 30 armored vehicles, and we've destroyed 40 of them. Somebody's not correct. Anyway, that's why I don't trust the Russian claims, I guess. The same guy also says, in addition to the fighting in the southern Donetsk area, he says Volnovakha may be the target. Ukrainian units are fighting southwest of Bakhmut, and artillery is striking targets in Vuhledar. He notes that the main force has not yet been committed. So again, this is the idea that this counteroffensive has not yet started proper, that these are therefore kind of reconnaissance in force. But the idea there that was kind of put out there is that Volnovakha could be the target. And that is a hub. It's a transport hub both for railway and roads, as you can see. And that's where the Russians support the Pavlivka and Vuhledar offensives. They have supported from there. And Volnovakha gets hit quite often with artillery and HIMARS and whatnot. But it could be that is one of the potential targets, objectives for pushing down from this area, this corner of Donetsk. Anyway, that's what's going on in Velika Novosilka. Let's return to the ISW that makes some mention of this. All the kind of things I've said myself already. Some Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces broke through the first line of Russian defense and advanced 500 meters to 3 kilometers. Actually, let's go and look at the map to see what kind of distances we're talking about here, because sometimes it is difficult to know when you're just looking at a map that's been zoomed in and out of. If we talk about something like that distance, that would be about 5 kilometers. So yeah, somewhere from between 500 meters and 5 kilometers makes a lot of sense to me. If we talk about that there to there, that's 1.5 kilometers. So there you go, about a mile. Anyway, return to the ISW just to finish off. Some mill bloggers also claim that Ukrainian forces attempted limited counterattacks near Malatok-Machka. There's been some activity there previously as well. This is over towards Hyliopolye, and then further on towards spit it out, Pierce, Orikhiv. So you've got Malatok-Machka there. There could be some activity in that area too. We have seen that there were some mapping changes from Vuhledar there recently. In fact, let's go to Vuhledar and just look at the other maps they have. So here is Velika Novosilka. You can see mainly around the actual Velika Novosilka town and going towards Neskutchna. The idea that Neskutchna is now possibly under Ukrainian control. So if you look at my map, actually, I'd probably need to have the Ukrainians further forward here to react to that if that is indeed the case, and then over here towards Rivnepil and Novopil, between those two settlements are the main gains there, but they're pushing all along there. That's that area. And then the idea is here, Malatok-Machka could well be some Ukrainian gains in that area as well. Anyway, that's the frontline update for today. that it's going to start being really dynamic right up and down the front line. Uh, it's going to be very difficult for me to keep on top of what's going on, but I'll do my very best. But remember, the maps can give you a snapshot at a particular point in time. Lines could go either way. From the information I'm getting isn't necessarily from right now. It might be from yesterday, and things will have changed. They're fighting as we speak now, depending on when you're watching this video. When I'm compiling it, don't take this as gospel. It's just going to be very dynamic. It's also going to be incredibly busy the next few weeks with a counteroffensive looming. So hopefully I'll be able to do my best and keep up with that. Anyway, take care. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll speak to you soon.